presenting music today composed by two French composers who have had a significant impact on the music world we live in, yet are largely ignored or forgotten. To give you an idea of what we're talking about, think about the music you learned as a young student. Think about the music you assigned to your students. How many of the composers are French? How many are German or Austrian? How many of your students request to play a Debussy prelude or even Clair de Lune? On the other hand, how many students request to play Fur Elise or Moonlight Sonata? In some ways, an argument could be made that we all grow up musically speaking with a German accent. Let's take a brief look at the historical context. French composers had a very strong and lasting presence from the 1500s to the mid-1700s, with composers such as the Couperin family, Lully, and Rameau. Then we see a rise in the Germanic influence with the Bach family, Mozart, and Beethoven, followed by the music of Schumann, Liszt, and Wagner. Interestingly, these Romantic composers, along with Chopin, were all about the same age. Their distinctive styles and huge presence strongly dominated musical style and expectations of their day. Perhaps because of their closeness in age, they were less influenced by what each other was doing. Clara Schumann was a bit younger, but as a performer and teacher well into the 1880s, served as a perpetuator of the powerful Germanic influence on European music, as of course did Brahms. Heading into the mid-1800s, French and Spanish composers start to take on a more prominent role that coincided with the rebirth of the performance and study of ancient French music. In many ways, the French and Spanish composers of that time were really one group. There was a crossover between the two, with shared teachers from both countries, musical and cultural idioms, and society. European borders in those years being more of a point in time than a fixed location. Quite often, concerts were split between ancient and modern French composers. There was a wider gap in ages among the composers of that time that would have allowed for a greater influence of the older on the younger, though perhaps more in the negative way. This led to a growing rift between conservative French composers, of whom Chaminade clearly belongs, and the more adventurous, to whom Chabrier took the lead. One viewpoint French composers shared was that they were not German, likely due to the pervasive influence of the Germanic Romantic style and the intense Europe-wide love-hate relationship that everyone had with Wagner. French composers became something of control freaks. For example, a Germanic phrase might cry out for a broadening or a dramatic retard, even when not notated for such. The French composers wanted nothing to do with that. They wanted their music performed as they indicated. They preferred what we might call a palate cleanser, like a bite of sherbet between courses, a lift and a break, and then on. When they marked a passage sans expression, they didn't mean to play it without expression. They meant merely, don't make it sound German. In the late Romantic, early Impressionistic period that we're representing today, there was a sort of free-for-all going on. While in the present day, we tend to be sticklers for performing works in their original format. Then arrangements were frequently made to fit audience demands. If the composers didn't have time to do it themselves, someone else did it. So something for piano duo may also appear orchestrated, or for piano duet. Composers then, as now, needed to make a living. Hearing, studying, or editing music frequently led to a borrowing of a harmony or idea, then expanding it harmonically, loosening it modally, or taking it in a different direction. So if you hear or suspect a quotation or detect a resemblance to another work, you are likely right. In fact, according to Roy Howitt in his book, The Art of French Piano Music, there are always more links under the surface than we'll ever fully know. It is frequently a performer's choice whether to highlight references or enjoy them on a less prominent level. For 21st century performers on our powerful instruments, knowing the cultural preferences can help us in our own performance decisions. Getting to know a bit about the composer's life and specific comments on a piece can be helpful. However, we are also playing within the context of our own times and our own audiences. What was innovative and shocking to one generation and performed that way may now be familiar and expected, all of which influences our own performance decisions. While 16 years younger than Emmanuel Chabrier, Cecile Chaminade was musically his predecessor. Her compositions are solidly late Romantic and are often compared to those of Chopin, who had died 18 years before her birth. Her works effectively sum up and culminate the Romantic period, whereas Chabrier was credited by contemporary French and Spanish composers and those who followed him with being the catalyst of the direction French and Spanish music took during and after his lifetime. Chaminade's 6 Opus 55 Romantic pieces were published in 1890, while Chabrier's 3 Romantic waltzes were published 7 years earlier in 1883. In spite of a strong difference in compositional style and lifestyle in general, Chaminade and Chabrier moved in the same musical circles and were, in fact, friends. Cecile Chaminade was born into a fairly well-to-do musical family. Her father was a manager of an insurance office and a violinist. Her mother was a singer and pianist and Chaminade's first teacher. She began composing when she was about 7 years old. At 9 or 10, Chaminade was taken for assessment to Les Coupés, who advised entering her in the Paris Conservatory. Her father did not approve of women of their class attending the conservatory, but did allow her to study privately with members of the faculty and with Benjamin Godard, likely before he started teaching there. She also met Georges Bizet in 1869, who admired her musical gifts. Interestingly, the director of the conservatory for much of the time she was studying was strongly criticized for his conservative approach. Chabrier, in fact, was one of those critics, while there is no evidence that Chaminade voiced any complaint. Based on concert programs, reviews, and the rapid publishing of her compositions, it appears that Chaminade quickly was recognized and had a large following. As with most musicians, her priority was to support herself, doing what she loved. So, while she composed larger works for orchestra and chamber works, financial necessity led Chaminade to focus on the more profitable, high-sales forms of piano and vocal music. By the 1890s, she began extensive concert tours, performing her own works, which both promoted sheet music sales and more or less locked her into composing music that would sell to the biggest markets: piano, vocal, and to a lesser degree, flute. Queen Victoria of England was a huge fan and invited Chaminade to perform at Windsor Castle. And Chaminade's organ prelude was performed at the Queen's funeral. Even before she started touring in the United States, Chaminade was immensely popular. From the 1890s through into the 1940s, a uniquely American, at the time, phenomena developed. Groups of musicians, primarily women, formed clubs to perform works by various composers, including, of course, Chaminade. They chose to call them Chaminade clubs as a mark of respect for her as a person and a love for her music. Hundreds of these clubs were formed. These clubs grew in tandem with the newly founded National Federation of Music Clubs, often becoming the senior and junior clubs sponsoring federated festivals. A few of these Chaminade clubs are still in existence. One of them has provided an endowment which supports awards for young artist winners of the National Federation Music Clubs. We see her legacy here in Georgia with the Atlanta Musicale Group, the Gillick Society, and in our own senior and junior clubs. Chaminade's concert tours in the United States were among the highest grossing of the time and were usually quickly sold out. While having a huge popular following and enjoying generally critical success, a few strong criticisms began to dominate. When elegant, her music was condemned as being too feminine. When powerful, too masculine. As a woman composer, both traits were considered unbecoming. Being feminine made it beneath male notice. Masculine was unnatural. Her being a woman factored into every comment, something male composers typically never faced. In addition, her non-traditional music education and her own natural reserve kept her from taking a stronger role in the music world of the time. However, in 1913, Chaminade became the first female composer inducted into the French Legion of Honor. The main factor in Chaminade's dramatic decline in popularity was likely the male-dominated critics and sexism in general, something still in the news today. Chaminade primarily published piano and vocal works since she needed the income. During that time period, the piano had been pigeonholed as a feminine salon instrument, not for serious male tastes. Chopin's music had also been relegated to salon status, only regaining stature through strong male advocacy. Without a strong champion, Chaminade's piano music has remained relatively unperformed. However, her songs and chamber music hold a place in the literature of vocalists and instrumentalists. Looking at a sampling of her published solo piano music, you can easily see that her music is challenging and virtuosic, and much like Chopin's. The 6 pieces that we are performing today are accessible, have beautiful melodies, and are fun to perform. The final piece in the suite brings us full circle to the start of French music with the ancient rigodon dance form. Emmanuel Chabrier was uninhibitedly the life of the party and unashamedly romantic by nature. He was also a loving husband and father. In personality and character, an extreme opposite to his friend Cecile Chaminade. Like Chaminade, Chabrier also began studying piano at age 6 with Spanish and Polish teachers, and was composing by age 8. His teachers also recommended a conservatory education. However, again, as with Chaminade, his father would not allow it. So Chabrier's music education also was private, but for a different reason, one that is still common today. His father didn't think music was a very lucrative career and insisted he follow the family tradition of becoming a lawyer, which Chabrier did, working at the Ministry of the Interior for 19 years. Contemporary French composer and teacher Vincent d'Indy describes Chabrier's playing as, with his stubby arms, fat fingers, and a certain clumsiness of motion, Chabrier nonetheless could attain extreme finesse and a maximum of expression which very few great pianists, hardly even Liszt and Anton Rubinstein, have surpassed. There were also a fair number of diary entries and letters describing the damages his playing inflicted on the more delicate instruments of his day. One hostess saying that she couldn't bring herself to perform after Chabrier had done so, and besides, the piano had been left unplayable. It was when Chabrier first heard Wagner's Tristan and Isolde that he was moved first to tears, then to quitting his day job and turning to composition full-time in 1881. He then composed a rollicking duet piece called Souvenirs of Music, a light-hearted parody of the very music he loved. Chabrier deeply admired Wagner's works, yet was widely recognized by his contemporaries as pursuing his own independent course. Chabrier's personality and financial means had a great deal to do with his place in the music world. He built an impressive collection of impressionistic art, was close friends with Monet and Renoir and their accomplished pianist wives. His social circle was primarily in the salons of the day, frequented by leading musicians and artists. In spite of his secular training and work, Chabrier was not viewed by his peers as an amateur. His works were studied and discussed. He was musically a rule breaker and voiced strong criticisms of the Paris Conservatory as being too traditional. However, Chabrier and contemporary French and Spanish composers did not see themselves as starting a new era, but pursuing a natural continuation, a development of romantic music, especially that of Schumann and Chopin. Chabrier was fascinated with Schumann, whose influence can be detected in his on-beat dissonances, the use of contrapuntal daisy chains of dissonance, and chromatically rising lines. This period also saw an increasingly orchestral view of the piano. This is certainly the case with Chabrier, with changing tone color, underlying voices, and sudden interjections requiring an orchestral view in determining voicing and hierarchy. Interestingly, and perhaps due to this more orchestral view, it was Chabrier who introduced the use of 3 staves in piano music, though not in the waltzes. Significantly, it was his composition of the 3 romantic waltzes in 1883 that had a tremendous impact on the composers of his day. They considered them to be pivotal in the direction that their own works took. Chabrier composed the first 2 waltzes in mid-1880, completing the 3rd in 1883. He wrote his friend Paul Lacombe that he didn't know why he was writing them, as the Enochs, his publishers, will find them too long, too difficult. He added that he thought they might sell well, particularly to young ladies who play the piano seriously. The waltzes were given their first public performance at the National Society of Music on December 15, 1883, with André Messager and the composer playing. Messager would later play them with Francis Poulenc. The conservative progressive schism was still in existence when, for performance in 1887, d'Indy wrote that Chabrier told him not to play the pieces as if they were by a member of the Institute, and followed that with a lesson in playing, incorporating a wide range of expression and interpretive detail. Claude Debussy studied the waltzes while at the Villa Medici in 1885 with Paul Vidal. The 2 played them to Franz Liszt, who was visiting Rome in 1886. In 1893, at the Salle Pleyel, Maurice Ravel and Ricardo Vignes played them to Chabrier, who spent an hour and a half giving them his encouragement and advice. We are fairly sure that our performance of his waltzes would merit our receiving some rather strong coaching from Chabrier as well. French composer and pianist Maurice Delager notes the many novelties in the pieces: chains of ninths, melodic use of pentatonic scales in the 3rd waltz, and sharp and spontaneous rhythms. In these these three waltzes, you will hear the beginnings of what we now consider to be impressionistic music. Taken in historical perspective, we are hearing the music that led to that of Debussy, Ravel, Satie, and Poulenc. Listen for repeated cadence patterns, soft and not too soft timpani, syncopation, hemiolas, quotations and patterns from ancient French composers, half-step changes on repeated phrases, chromatic chains of second inversion triads, appoggiatura tenths resolving to the ninth, and ninth chord trails. About another of Chabrier's pieces, Poulenc wrote, "I have no hesitation in declaring that Chabrier's pieces picturesque are as important for French music as Debussy's preludes." He also insisted that another of Chabrier's pieces opened up a new harmonic universe for him. Ravel attributes his use of modes to Chabrier and wrote, "Of course, I was influenced above all by a musician, Chabrier, who moreover still does not have the recognition he deserves. For all of contemporary French music stems from his work. His role was as important as that of Manet in painting. If the Debussy Revelation did not touch me deeply, it's because I was already conquered by Chabrier." We hope that you will enjoy our performance of the Chaminade and Chabrier and forgive us our imperfections. It was certainly a challenge working together safely during this pandemic, and in fact, we didn't practice together for some time. We eventually worked out what we feel to be reasonable precautions and protections to get these pieces recorded. We hope that they will inspire you to look more deeply into the works of these two forgotten French composers.
Thank you.